I'm not going to claim I understand everything in 73 yards. In fact, I think as we talk about it, I will probably confuse myself more because it's kind of one of those
I
things where like I think I get it and then I start to talk about it and I'm like, wait, that doesn't make sense. You
and
know?
and honestly, dude, my thought is that what is confusing you is probably confusing everybody. Like
Yeah.
like what I've read is that people are like, "Oh, such a great episode. Don't understand a bit about what is happening at the end. Like, where'd the doctor go? Who
That's
knows where the doctor went throughout the entire episode?"
what's the movie
What
that
does
has the spinning top? Uh
Inception?
yeah, like that's like that movie or the other one they did recently. The same guy did a movie recently with the guy from Twilight.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Tenant,
Tenet,
right?
yeah, like those movies.
Yeah,
I
yeah, yeah.
watch them and like I feel like I get it for the most part, but then there's things where I'm just like I have no idea. Like when I
Yeah.
watched Tenet the first
And,
time, I was like, I don't know what happened.
yep.
I think this movie's kind of cool, but like I'm lost, you know.
Right, right. I mean, I don't understand the whole like end scene with the hands and then like that's her. I don't
Yeah,
understand what's going
well,
on there.
yeah. I mean, we're already talking about it, so we might as well get into it.
Might as well jump in.
Jump in and start the episode. I might just leave that stuff in just so we since we've already kind of discussed our confusions. So Adam,
Go
this
for it.
this episode of Doctor Who confused me, but I did try to do my research, my due diligence. I watched it twice. I watched the behind the scenes videos, which they had a few. I even went this far. You know how you go to like you watch a movie or something that confuses you and then you just Google the name of that movie explained.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
there's
yeah, yeah.
somebody out there that has a blog or a video that explains it. I don't like doing that because I like to have my own interpretation. I don't want somebody else to explain
Understood.
it to me.
Absolutely. Yep.
But there are definitely times where I get to the point where I'm like, you know what? I need to know someone else's opinion on what happened here because I can't make sense of it. That's kind of how I felt after this episode. So I did watch a YouTuber, which I probably should give him credit, but I'm not like stealing his stuff, so I don't really remember the name of the YouTuber. But I watched his video and it was longer than 10 minutes. And he kind of went through the story and kind
That's
of,
commitment.
but it was more his opinion of what it was and not really like
Okay.
he felt like he had the answer. So
Yeah.
even then I was like, okay, well, that's what you think, but who knows what the real answer is. And I shouldn't, my opinion on this kind of stuff is if I have to go and like look up a video to explain to me what happened, then that's I shouldn't have to do that. Like you didn't do your best in storytelling. You know,
That's
you didn't do your part. I don't know how I'm saying it wrong, but you know what I mean.
no, I get it. So after all the things that you dug into, do you feel like you have any clarity on your understanding, your interpretation of, and I guess maybe this is something that we can talk about as we go through it.
Yeah.
What are we trying to interpret? What is the main thing that is causing confusion or the need to delve deeper into this episode? Because I
Right.
do feel like it plays at a couple different levels, right? Like if we just blindly accept it at surface value and just like whatever they give us on the screen, we're cool with. I think it's pretty awesome. That said, from my side, I do feel like there's a few things throughout it that I'm like, I don't know how this works. I don't know if that's a question that is actually answered. Um, and I'm struggling to find out if there really is something more to it, or if I've heard a couple of people reference like Welsh horror. Like, is this just such a sub genre of storytelling that I'm not used to? And maybe this is just how this type of sub genre of horror movies is supposed to play out, where it just kind of circles back on itself and we don't get any explanation. There is no answer. It's just what you expect of this story. Um, I don't know. We can kind of. I'd be interested to hear what are those things as we work our way through, though. What are those sticking points for you?
Yeah. Yeah, we will. Let's start talking about the episode and I think we'll get to the parts that I think were confusing probably for many people. I don't think like I don't think there is a clear answer. I don't think there,
Yeah.
even in the behind the scenes stuff and hearing Davis talk about kind of what was going on, there was no clear answer to some of the questions. So I think
Right.
it's left up to
Cool.
interpretation
Cool.
in some ways, which is fine. Left up for debate, whatever.
Yeah.
So you and I have not talked about this episode at all, other than me
At
texting you a
all.
couple times saying this is kind of a scary episode. But other than that,
That's
we really haven't talked about it. So we're gonna get each other's first impressions as we talk through this. But we will, as we've been doing lately, kind of run down the stats for this episode. The title is 73 Yards. This is series 14, episode 4, featuring the 15th Doctor. The main enemy was Roger Apguilliam, which
yes.
main setting Wales 2024, key crew writer Russell T Davies, director Dylan Holmes Williams, and producer Vicky Dilo. Music, as always, by Murray Gold. Story number 308. So yeah, this one, it starts out, they head to Wales, or they land on Wales in the TARDIS. The Doctor seems very excited to be there.
Yes.
I'm getting more used to this version of the Doctor and kind of how everything is just like, what? Like kind of the outbursts and the exclamations. This was a little more toned down, but I think I'm just kind of getting used to it now.
And I think honestly, this is a Doctor Light episode, right? Like we probably get him for 8-10 minutes of the entire episode, if that.
Yes.
um, so in that small dosage, there isn't really all that much exuberance that gets crammed into that short period of time. But
It's a
yeah,
very
it's
it's kind of the opposite in this episode, right? Because he's not around, Ruby doesn't have anyone to play off of,
right.
and she herself is kind of in a state of fear for a lot of the
Yeah,
episodes. So she's really low key. So it is like if there was like any response to fans that were kind of annoyed by the kind of bubbliness of these two characters together, this was a good episode to kind of tone that down and kind of
yeah,
bring it all down and to be a very like, borderline scary episode, very dramatic. There were moments where I'm just like, whoa, like, this
yeah,
is kind of like creepy. Like I was kind of getting my skin was crawling at different points and stuff. So yeah, I definitely nothing, when he came out of the TARDIS was excited to see whales. I actually found that charming. I thought it was kind of a cool
yeah,
scene for him to, talk about how beautiful the scenery was and like, the cliffs and the ocean and like that's all stuff that I probably would do if I ever got to visit that location. And, maybe I wouldn't do it so outwardly, but I would have, I would be in awe of it. And he was absolutely in awe of this place that he's probably been plenty of times. But it was a nice little scene, I thought, when they first landed there.
yeah. And I think that's something that we've come to expect from the Doctor too. When the TARDIS doors swing open and the Doctor steps out of the TARDIS in a location, I feel like we've seen Capaldi have these moments of just being in awe about what's around him, whether it's a spaceship or it's space. Tenant, I feel like we've seen this something similar. Even Matt Smith, I rewatched an episode with my son of Matt Smith today, and it just struck me of like, oh, okay, there is all that to say. I feel like the Doctor is present in Gatwa's Doctor. I
Mhm.
also feel like you are starting to get a better sense of who he is as the Doctor. So, like some of these highs and some of these lows, they don't hit me as being too high or too low because it's like, oh, that's just his Doctor. But I do think that stark contrast that we see in this episode where things are toned down, it just adds to the overall tone of the episode, right? Like you said, scary. It's definitely frightening at moments just because of what is happening. And I think because Ruby by herself doesn't have the Doctor to play off of because everything's toned down, it does just add to the overall ambiance that the episode is kind of giving throughout.
Yeah, we talked about the doctor's outfit and how he doesn't have one. He
Yeah.
just kind of wears
Nope.
whatever strikes him.
Yeah.
Um, this was definitely, he was, styling. I don't know how to describe what he was wearing, but it was cool. And they almost were like color coordinated. He had like different shades of orange on with like his
Yeah.
jacket and his hat, and then she had like the orange sweater. So yeah, I thought, the cut. I kind of am imagining now that they're like matching outfits, like he's like, oh, this is what I'm gonna wear today. What are you, like, but I appreciated this sense of style. I
Yeah.
think I'm getting more used to the fact that he's just not gonna have an outfit, which I still am a little disappointed. I think that is kind of part of the Doctor, but this version of the Doctor is just he's just gonna wear different things for different times and whatever makes sense for the moment.
He will definitely be the most well dressed, most stylish doctor that we've had up to this point. And if they go back to having a set costume after Gatwa, uh, Gatwa will hold that place by himself. The 15th will be the stylish doctor. Uh,
Maybe.
yeah,
Yeah.
I mean that's what it is.
Yeah. Um, so they Oh, he mentioned something about this prime minister and like he's talking about how great
Yep.
Wales is, but then he's like, oh, the one bad thing is this prime minister. But oh yeah, what time are you from? Spoilers, that doesn't happen for another 20 years, et cetera, et cetera. Seems like a throwaway line
Oh,
at this
absolutely.
point, but I did catch the name because I had remembered when we were looking at like casting and like who different characters were playing or different actors were playing that name stood out to me when he said the name of the prime minister. I had
Okay.
remembered in the casting announcements that that was a character that was going to be played. So I was like, oh, okay. I, I thought he was dropping it as something that a character they would come across in a future episode, not fully expecting it to actually happen in this episode. But it was a nice little name drop for something that's going to happen later.
Yeah, I right on you. And that was the question I was going to ask is whether you viewed that if you felt like the name outside of your prior knowledge, if you felt like the name carried with it any foreboding. For me, it was just like, oh, it's a throwaway line, especially knowing that the doctor does similar things like this in other episodes. Other
Hmm.
doctors do something similar where they throw something out and then they're like, oh yeah, I forgot. You don't know about that yet because that's so far in the future you don't even have to worry about it. To me it was more of that finger on the pulse of who the doctor is. He's a time traveler. Sometimes he forgets where he's at and what has already been experienced by his companion. So yeah, I didn't think anything of it. Props to you for actually being able to recognize,
I
oh,
just remember the
this was
name
a casting.
was so unique
Yeah, 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 yeah,
that it kind of stood out to me. Because it's Guillaume, right? Guillaume.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I was like, oh, that's an interesting name. I had never heard that, it's a very Welsh name, I think, but I
Yeah.
had not a name typically hear in my circles. Um, so yeah, so they get there and then he steps on what we find out later is called a fairy circle.
Yeah.
And right away, you kind of get this sense of like, oh, that's not a good, like it, even just looking at it, it looks like something that like the local witches did, like
Right.
right
Yep.
away, you get this sense of like, oh, probably not good that you did that. It was kind of funny to me that Ruby kind of said, oh, this looks like something children made. She's like, with like little ribbon and bird skulls. And I'm like, wait, what kind of
Right.
children are you around? Like, I don't,
Right. Yep.
to me, that would have instantly, when I've seen animal skulls and, the way that thing looked, it instantly would have said to me, you know, witchcraft. That's the first
Right.
thing I would have thought, not children made this.
Right. We are of the Blair Witch Project generation, right? When you find something like that in the woods, you don't mess with it. You walk away from it. You don't want to have any part of that. I would have thought Ruby would at least be familiar with Blair Witch Project. You don't mess with freaky things like that in the woods, which again I think is interesting just because we've talked about how the Doctor Who is touching more on the supernatural, right?
Yeah.
And even in the previews, they definitely made it seem like we were going to get Bubble Boyle in trouble. The witches, the Welsh witches are there. It's funny how once we get a little bit further in the episode, how the patrons of the bar play off of that assumption that there are witches involved, which it seems like there is something at play there that even the patrons of the bar didn't necessarily want to cop up to. But all that said, as soon as you start calling out bird skulls, to your point,
Yeah. Yeah.
no,
I
I'm not
wasn't
going to mess
thinking,
with bird skulls.
I definitely wasn't thinking children made it
No,
by any means. So yeah, so then she sees that she starts picking up the notes, reading it. One of them says, "Rest in peace," or "I miss you. Yeah, I Miss You was the one she read, and the other one was Rest in Peace, Mad Jack. Which then
Yeah,
again, once again, you hear that and you're like, oh crap, like what spirit did they just release onto the world?
right, right.
She still doesn't seem very bothered by anything, anything that's going on. Even the doctor didn't seem that concerned. He was just kind of like, oh no, like this is, I kind of messed this up, but it wasn't like, oh no, like there's a huge problem here.
Yeah,
But then that's where everything starts to go crazy, where the doctor literally just disappears,
yeah, yep,
um, and Ruby is left on her own, and she has no idea what's going on.
yeah. And this is the part that I, from this point, right? Like anytime the doctor disappears, there's going to be issues. But this is something that I've come back to multiple times after watching the episode, as far as like, why? Why did the doctor suddenly disappear? Because we haven't been introduced to the distant woman yet, who shows up very soon after we realize that the doctor's gone.
Hmm.
And based on what we know, it usually involves someone having some interaction with this individual for them to then take off. So
Right.
is that the reason for the disappearance? I don't know, but the doctor's
Yeah.
gone.
So I guess in retrospect, knowing what I know now, I actually never thought about that like he disappeared because of the way that other people disappeared, the interaction with her and then running off, scared almost.
Yeah,
I always just thought he just disappeared. And the explanation for it was never really given. It's left up to your interpretation as to why he disappeared. Um, and I guess the only explanation I would have is that it's just part of the overall what they did. It's like the punishment of breaking that circle,
yeah,
and that whatever curse was put upon them, that was all part of it. And that's
yeah.
that's kind of how I interpreted it, because they really didn't give us any explanation. Even after, the resolution at the end, there was no explanation of the doctor going, "Oh, I was taken to this other place," or like, "Oh, I'm so happy that you survived this," or I'm happy to see you again." There wasn't any explanation. It was just kind of like it never happened, which
Yeah.
we'll get into why that is the case, and maybe try to connect some dots. But yeah, in this moment, doctor's gone, and we see this really creepy old lady off in the distance, doing these like
Yep.
kind of hand signs, right? And like kind
Yeah.
of like putting her hands out, and it seemed to like she was repeating the exact same motions. So it felt very, I mean, you're already kind of getting the assumption that this circle thing with the yarn and the skulls, and you're like, okay, that's very witchcrafty. And not because it's in Wales. No, I wasn't
Right.
like they were the Welsh people were like, oh, that's just racism that you think this of us. I wasn't
Yeah.
connecting that because of Wales. I've seen enough about witches in like Massachusetts or
Right.
any other place that it has nothing to
Right.
do with the fact they're in Wales. I did not think of that. But yeah, this woman that's off in the distance, and then you have this, you're kind of thinking, okay, this is like some witch, right? Like the way she
Yeah.
looked with the scraggly hair, and
Yep.
it kind of all connected that, okay, there's some witch's creation here. They stepped in it, and now they're dealing with this witch. That's kind of
Right.
what I was taking.
Oh yeah, 100%. And I feel like the way that they, I mean, to your point, the long scraggly hair, like those ever since childhood, right? Like what we've come to expect of storybook witches. The long scraggly hair, the coat that she had on, like it fit what we were expecting. I think what makes this character so frightening, the distance, yes, but just how fuzzy it was, and like you can never get a good look at her. And that even comes up later in the episode. You can never get a clear picture of who she is. You can never see exactly what her face looks like. And that unknown aspect to her, I think, plays so well when looking at even some of the other creatures or characters that we get in previous episodes, future episodes that we haven't talked about yet, but we have watched. Like, what makes this character frightening is kind of the unknown nature of where'd she come from? Why can't we see her clearly? What the heck do her hand motions mean? and just the overall uncertainty, weirdness about what's taking place. It's just that unsettledness that you get from this point forward throughout the episode.
Yeah, it was very prevalent, as Ruby tries to interact with her, tries to run toward her, can't get, and she's kind of like, okay,
Yeah.
what's going on here? I need to go find help, right? And so
Yep.
she starts
Yeah.
hiking down the cliffs down to the nearest town, comes across a hiker who, lo and behold, is the same actor
Yep.
that has been playing, has been popping up in the different stories. And they even have an interaction where she's like, "Do I know you?" And she's like, "Do you know me?" So there is some recognition even now from the writing that, okay,
Yeah.
this character is popping up and now Ruby is actually recognizing her.
Yeah.
That's it in this episode.
Yep.
Nothing else. We don't get any kind of, you know, any other nods toward what that means or what that character means. But there is that little moment that I thought was kind of nice that they're keeping that as a mystery
Yeah.
that hopefully we'll find out more in the near future. But this woman kind of plays along because she's like, "Hey, this lady's following me. I don't know why.
Right.
Can you go talk to her for me? Maybe even ask about the doctor." And then we find out what happens to people when they go talk to this woman, right?
Right.
The hiker goes over, talks to her, and whatever interaction they have, you can't really hear like if she's
No.
saying something or it's just the
Right.
way she looks, but something's freaking her out. And then she runs off, kind of scream. I wouldn't call it screaming, even though the subtitle said screaming. It's more like a yell, like a, like I don't know, maybe that's
Right.
screaming, but it didn't. It was just like, yeah, she was afraid,
Yeah.
and she ran away. So then now Ruby's again on her own and trying to find her way, to somewhere. So she goes down into this town and finds a
Yep.
pub.
Yeah. I'm just going back to the hiker. I'm really interested because again, we have our first recognition by a character in the story that this character, number one, exists. The hiker exists as a character, but also exists elsewhere as different characters, right? This is that first moment where they're starting to recognize something weird is at play here. And with all the theories that are out there or that we could have about who this character is, what I think is interesting is that she is kind of locked in by the same rules that every other character in this episode is to whatever is or whoever is following Ruby, right? Like she's not above the impact of whoever's following Ruby. She is impacted in the same way, or she's playing along with it. Like if we think that this is some character who transcends the stories and times and space because she shows up everywhere, past, present, and future, like is she just playing along with what is happening because the 73-yard away person is telling her and she's just playing along with it to amp up Ruby's, I don't know, stress in the moment? Or is she actually bound by the same rules of the story? I don't know. I just think it's interesting that like I'm curious to find out who this person is and like whether she's just playing along the entire time, or if she really was impacted the same way that every other person in the story is impacted by this individual. Um,
Yeah. I was kind of I'm kind of thinking maybe it's not even that she is some like being that's purposefully being in all these different places. Like it's almost like maybe they're just reusing the same face um as like almost like a trying to tip Ruby off a little bit of something that this connectedness. And it's like, oh, look, you're even seeing the same face everywhere you're going. Like, but that face isn't necessarily the face of someone that is like a powerful being, but just a face that they're using in different places. I don't know. I think that's an alternate thing that could be happening. Like we might be overthinking it and be like, oh, this is like
yeah,
going to ultimately be the one who's waiting or whatever, whatever line they threw out. Um, because yeah, every time they've come across this person, it doesn't seem like they're anything other than just another person, another citizen,
right,
right? Like,
right,
so yeah, it'll be I think there's a couple different ways they can go with it. It will definitely
yeah,
be interesting to see ultimately what they do go with.
yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I wasn't even thinking about that this this episode. I
I
was kind of like, okay, she showed up, but who the heck is this crazy lady? Like I was like so
yeah,
on the edge of my seat for this one. I was loving because I like these kind of episodes that kind of like keep
Oh,
you guessing and kind of freak you out a little bit. Tends to be my more preferred type of Doctor Who. So this was like kind of coming back to like, oh yeah, this is the kind of Doctor Who I like, this mysterious kind of
yep.
creepy stuff. Yeah.
100% agreed. And I think once Ruby gets into the village, right? Because that's where she goes after the hiker. She finds her
Mhm.
way into a village pub and she has really interesting interactions with with all the patrons of the
Yeah.
bar. And
Yeah.
I think this is one of those things where I don't think it has as much of a um right. We go back to the messages that we've seen in various episodes. Cultural touch points, all these different things that have come up. And I feel like this is probably one that plays a lot better to a different audience because of the way that they played it out so much where it was like the patrons being Welsh were trying to call out all these stereotypes that weren't really true.
Mhm.
They aren't some people out in the sticks who have no idea how to use a technology. They don't buy into all of these urban legends and mystical supernatural things, and they are normal people. I think that might land differently for a different audience, but for me, it was really interesting to watch the interactions and be like, oh, this doesn't apply to me because I didn't know any of these things were actually held about Welsh people who
Yeah.
lived on mountainsides.
Yeah. I think for a certain audience, because Doctor Who being set in the UK and like, there is definitely tensions between the different countries in that
Yeah,
region, right? We have Ireland, Scotland, Wales, England all have history and they all have border dispute kind of
right.
history and like, you did us wrong here, you did us wrong there. And so there's obviously some of that built into this story that us as Americans who don't have, I mean, I don't know where your history goes, but my history does go back there. I think I'm like 7% Welsh or something, but and mostly English. Like the majority of my DNA or whatever is English, but some Welsh. So I have a mix. But I never talked to my great 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 grandma
Right.
and
Yep.
heard any of these stories. All of my history is here in the U.S. and I don't have a big connection to that. So yeah, as I'm watching it, I'm not like yeah. Get those Brits or tell them how it is.
Right.
Like I don't know. Like I don't really know. I'm aware somewhat of some of those tensions, but not enough to really pick up on kind of what they were trying to do in that pub. All I was looking at it as an unbiased viewer, I'm just like, why are these people being so mean to Ruby? Like they're like she just wants to scan her card, you don't have to give her a hard time
Right.
about it. Like it felt like they were kind of going over the top on being like, kind of rude people
Yeah.
for this outsider.
Yeah. I think overall though, the way that this scene plays out is like the typical horror movie, maybe like 80s or 90s horror movie tropes where it's like rainy, everybody's in the bar. You're expecting, at least as an audience as a viewer, I'm expecting this is where things are going to go horribly wrong. That something's going to happen, someone's going to die flat out. But the way that it was shot, the camera angles being like somewhat up a close up, but yet at an interesting angle where it's highlighting chin and all that jazz. It was shot in such a way that I think it just amped up some of the frightening horror movie elements of this episode. Um, I mean, you
Yeah.
even had the '80s punk kid in the pub who, I mean, I you know why a Mad Jack will get me. I fit the type. Like it's it was they played that scene very, very well.
Yeah, you definitely had a feeling of like, oh, are they going to get trapped here?
Right.
Are they going to all kind of start dying one by one? Like, yeah, I had that kind of feeling. Now, they didn't really go down that route. It kind of
No,
didn't really
not at all.
matter. In
They
fact,
played it
I
as a joke.
I kind of felt like a couple of the people in that bar were probably unnecessary. Like the one girl literally has one line, and like
Yep.
I don't really understand why she was there. I almost felt like there might have been scenes that were cut that included her because she really felt completely pointless. And then the guy. If I had to complain about any of the acting in this episode, that guy was pretty bad. The rock gothic, whatever he was supposed to look like kid, just didn't work for me. Even the costume, it just all looked like they just put it on him that morning. They put on the makeup, they put on the wig, like he just looked like he was a little too, he didn't fit. Like he was a little too made up. Everybody else I bought as, patrons of this place. That guy I was like, nah, I'm not buying
I,
that.
for me, it just called out like that 80s nostalgia. Like there's
Is
so
that
many
what you think that's
movies.
what they were going for? Like the
I
80s
think it
vibe?
was though. Like there's
Okay.
so many movies where where the character will walk into a place and it's just a hodgepodge of people that they do look slightly out of place and slightly ridiculous. And I feel like, at least to me, it seemed like that was the type of call out here. Dark and stormy night, you walk in and you have the teenagers, 20 somethings that shouldn't be there. You have the dad sitting in the corner. You have the old lady who's way too prim and proper to be out that late at a bar. And yet
But she's
she's sitting
sitting
there
right at
like
the
on the
bar,
edge of,
which is
yeah,
what
she's
they
sitting at
do.
the edge of her seat. Like,
She's
I
like
don't
been
know. It
there
just,
she's been going there for the past 30 years. She has her
yep.
spot. She sits at the bar. I've been to those kind of places that, like she made sense to me. The
That's,
kid talking about like, the like I don't know, the Christians getting killed by lions in the ring and blood and like just kind of randomly spurting that out. Like, and then, oh, he's gonna kill me and you know why. And I'm like, I don't know why. Like, what are you talking about, dude? Like, I don't know.
that's,
He was I could have done without him. Give me that whole all those same patrons minus him and maybe the girl that was with him. And I buy it a little bit more, I think. Just a
yeah.
nitpicky. It was just a nitpicky thing. Like even on a rewatch, I was like, this kid's annoying me. I don't like this kid.
Cool, cool. I mean, I get it. Each their own. To me, it was that homage, that trope, that they kind of pulled on there.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, we have them all, right? Like again, with the hiker, part of me was like, oh, we know who that is. So she's just making Ruby believe that she can see this person. But we get to the bar, and that's when, at least for me, it was confirmed. No, Ruby's not going crazy. The hiker wasn't messing with her head. Everybody else can see this person standing in a rainy street now, just standing there. Um, so one of the
Yeah.
patrons graciously goes to approach the hiker.
Yeah. And they don't seem overly concerned with it. And I
No,
know later on we find out like there's this whole idea of like, oh, there's some sort of perception filter in place that maybe people aren't really notice. Like they see her, but they don't really notice
right,
her. And I think that makes more sense later on. But these people have all been made aware of her. It's not like the perception filter is like making it so they're not really noticing her. And it does kind of seem like, man, if somebody was standing out there for like days and days and
right.
days, like wouldn't like I feel like you would got the police involved. Like there would have been something more than just looking out the window. Is she still there? Is she still there? Maybe this part of Wales doesn't have much of a police system. But yeah, it was kind of like, oh man, I feel like they should be a little bit more bothered by this. But yeah, the guy goes out and tries to talk to her, and then he has the same reaction. He runs
Yep.
away, which then the gothic kid comes up and overacts by the window about how much he got scared by it. That was kind of the moment that I was like, okay, dude. But yeah, like they don't really know what's going on with her, and it's definitely freaky. But this is where Ruby kind of starts to tell them about what happened, right?
Right.
She stepped in the ring, and then they all start telling her about, oh no, you did that, and like what, like Mad Jack, and like, and they're like really getting into this deep storytelling about what's going on and what happened and the history and the bloody, the castles and why the English put the castles there, and it was like, oh man, like this is really kind of starting to get intense, and like what did Ruby do? That she released the spirit or something? And then, of course, that we find out, it's all them just messing with her,
Yep.
which once again, in my mind, I'm just like looking at it from an outside perspective, being like, what in the world? What is wrong with these people? Like, this poor girl is coming in from the rain, has a stalker, and you're like playing pranks on her? Like, these are the meanest people. I was angry at these people. I'm like, why are you being so mean to Ruby? I felt so bad for her.
It does. I mean, I will say it is weird how everybody was treating her. Like from the very moment she walks in there and asks if she can pay with her phone. Um, but then like even later on, like no one is concerned that she is stuck there, that she is lost. Um, as everybody just like slowly disappears, because that's the way that they make it seem. Like she spends days there, and one by one, people will go and check on the woman and then never come back. And that's ultimately what pushes the owner of the establishment to finally be like, "Nope, you're leaving, and you're never coming back.
I will
You need to get
mention
out of here."
one thing like that may be connected, and the only reason I mention it is because I saw somebody else mention it. So I'm not going to take credit for even noticing this connection. But when she tells her how much the Coke's going to cost, and then Ruby's like, "How much is it?" Like because sounds like it's way too much.
Yeah.
That is like a callback to, I guess, when the coffee lady offers them the coffee, and then she says how much that's going to cost, and the doctor's like, "How much is it?" So that was an interesting like callback, or there's something else going on there that there's a connection that we should be paying
Huh.
attention. Who knows? But next time that someone asks for a drink and they ask how much it costs, we'll see like maybe in other episodes if it does continue to be a thing. But that's at least twice now that we've had characters question the expensiveness of drinks that they're being offered. Might not
I
mean anything.
did I did find that I did find it interesting that they made a big deal about that. I just thought it was another instance of the owner of the establishment price gouging Ruby because she could, and once again giving the poor girl a hard time. What was it? It was like five 5 pounds for a Coke.
Yeah, it was
It
like
was something ridiculous.
5 quid.
5 quid.
But yeah, it was five, which apparently like somebody was talking about it and they were saying I guess that's like way more than you would pay for a Coke typically in England or in Wales, I guess. Um, that you would pay like normally it's only like between 50, half a pound or a pound or whatever.
Okay.
And so five is really high. And then I guess the coffee that the doctor was surprised by that cost. Apparently that was like way more than a coffee would, like by even more
Huh.
than a coffee would normally cost in the 60s. So I don't know. Interesting. Probably means nothing. But yeah,
Yeah.
so she does stay at the pub. She's kind of living there. We don't really know exactly how long she's there, but basically they kind of get to the point where they're like, all right, you've outstayed your welcome. She tries to go back to the TARDIS, maybe hoping that maybe the doctor's in there. She kind of has like a little moment where she's talking through the door of the TARDIS and like, hey, maybe this is just what you do. Like, I
Yeah.
really hope you come back. I would love to see you again. Kind of almost begging. Because yeah, she's still relatively new traveling with the doctor. She doesn't know this guy's MO. She doesn't know, like maybe that for all she knows, he just, gets a companion for a little while and then just like leaves him, and
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
locks him out of the TARDIS. And she does seem to think that maybe that's what's going on, is that he's just in the TARDIS and he's just not letting her back in.
Yeah.
But then she finally gets to the point, all right, I'm going home. She yells at the lady, okay, you won, I'm leaving. Maybe even hoping that, hey, if I leave Wales or if I
Right.
leave this area, that I'm leaving her behind.
Yeah. And I think like the episode is frightening. We've already mentioned that a couple times. It's also heartbreaking, right? Like you realize at this moment that Ruby has just lost something that she thoroughly enjoyed, like traveling with the doctor, and just the sense of him just being in the TARDIS and like not coming out. Um, it's her acceptance of it is is huge. Um, but it's also heartbreaking, and it's not the first time we have that heartbreak for Ruby. Like I feel like over the course of this episode it starts frightening, and then like there's a little bit of heartbreak, but then as it goes on you start to realize that it's more heartbreaking and probably less frightening. It swings on that pendulum, because I feel like the further we get into the episode the more accepting we are of who this individual is, but
Yeah.
yet we also have to accept that it leads to pretty sad and lonely life ultimately for Ruby. Um,
It doesn't seem like this woman is dangerous. At one point,
no,
Ruby gets used to her and
yeah,
doesn't seem like she's even that bothered by it. It's more like she's just trying to figure out what it all means and like how can I find
right,
the doctor again. But yeah, it doesn't seem like the creepiness of it, the scariness of it does fade. And like you said, you start to feel more and more bad for Ruby. But then you also, as a viewer, you start to realize what we're watching her go through will be reversed in some way, right? Like just the logical leap is I'm not going to watch this companion age and go through all this time without the doctor and then rejoin the doctor as a 40-year-old. Like they're obviously going to reverse this in some way because we already kind of know what's coming next. We've seen previews. We know she's
Yeah.
not,
Yeah,
we
yeah,
know
yeah.
she's young. If you don't suspend that in your head, you're just kind of thinking logically, you start to think, okay, this is sad, but at the same time, you kind of already know it's not really the what's going to happen in the end. Something else is going on. There's going to be a reversal or alternate universe or some explanation where we get the old Ruby back and the doctor.
Yeah.
We know the doctor's coming back. Like this isn't the end of Ncuti Gatwa, and that's something that us as viewers kind of know going in.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely the history of old Amy to fall back on and be like, okay, just because you age, it doesn't mean that you actually age. Amy Pond, what was she, like 80 by the time that the doctor found her again? But all that was fine.
Well,
Um
this is a perfect place now that you brought it up for me to bring up one of the things that I don't like about Doctor Who. One of the storytelling tropes that I don't like, and that's the excessive aging of characters just for a plot point or putting a character through something that doesn't make sense that a human could go through, right? For example, Rory waiting for thousands of years or whatever it was as
yeah,
the centurion, and it's long enough ago. I
2000
don't
years.
remember all the details. The doctor taking thousands of years to punch through the diamond wall,
Yep.
you know, Amy staying and getting old, on that space station or wherever that was. I just don't like that stuff. To me, it doesn't make like they wouldn't do that, and now we have this character who is now also going through something like this where they have to, because well, I mean, if you're listening to us, you know the ending. But
Right.
if we come to the conclusion at the end that this woman that's been tracking her all this time is her, well, that means that she's, for however many years, just stood 73 yards from herself, making hand motions and mouthing words. So she went through torture. That's torturous, right?
Yeah.
To
Yeah.
do that. So like that's where I start to like my brain starts to kind of go, no, that's not. She wouldn't have done that. Like you reach your limit, where you're like, okay, I'm trying to get your attention or whatever to warn you about something that's going to happen. You're not listening to me. Okay, I'm leaving now. Like, like that.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe it's all part of the curse, or maybe she didn't have a choice or whatever. I don't know. Like whatever conclusions you want to come to. But I will, that's just a personal pet peeve of mine. And it does seem like a normal Doctor Who thing to
Yeah.
put characters through these kind of long term, like they were there for thousands of years and they did it. I don't like it. I've never liked it. And this is just another one of those type of scenarios that they were kind of doing that again.
Yeah, I get it. I do. I think
But you like it.
I might I might be a fool. Like this entire episode, I was like, how are they going to resolve this? Like
When
Ruby's
did
getting
you realize it
old.
was her?
Uh I I I still don't I still don't know if I realize that.
Oh, you don't
Which
you
is a
don't think it's her.
I don't know. It's hard. It's
It is
hard for
her.
me to say. I
If there's
is it?
anything I
Is
can
it?
like, if there's anything I'm sure about, that's what they were
So
telling us at the end was that it was her the whole time telling herself to not make that mistake again so she doesn't have to go through this time loop. I don't know how, like, I guess this is where we're going to go off the rails because we're
yeah,
kind of,
we've already gone off the
we,
rails, but
we're not following the story anymore, but that's fine. We do this sometimes. It's okay. But the way I kind of interpreted it at the end is like she was basically going through like this time loop, and she had to break the loop by
yeah.
finally warning herself to not step on the thing. So in my mind, we saw one version of that, but I think it could have happened multiple times until she finally got her to not step on the thing or got him to not step on the thing. I don't think we know how many times she lived through that, right? So it's a,
Yeah, I guess.
but I think it is clear at the end that it's her. She's the one that is there because they show her hands. She reaches out and then she's like, "Oh, I hit my microphone." But um, yeah. So to me, that part is clear. There's other questions I have that aren't clear, but that part is at least clear.
Okay, well then maybe I need to hear your other questions
Okay.
because I get to the end and Ruby laying in the bed is like 90 with
70s.
the totally different appearance than the lady that ends up being in the corner of her bedroom. Like
See, that
hair's
got
different,
me, but
age is different.
I thought that was just a way to throw us off. Because I even up to so my wife, I would give her credit. She called it before we even got to that point. She's like, "It's her." I'm like, "No, because her hair doesn't look the same." Like they show the old lady and her hair's short, you know,
Yeah.
and then they show the crazy lady and her hair's long, and I'm like, it can't be the same person because her hair's not the same. And then it is her, and so I'm like, oh, that was just them throwing us off. Like they purposely made her hair longer so people wouldn't guess that it's her. Um, TV does that. They'll cheat. That's what I call a cheat. You're
Yeah.
cheating the audience because the audience would have figured it out if you didn't cheat and give it a different hair length. So I think that's just an aesthetic that they put in purposefully to throw us off. But I don't think age-wise she looked different. I think it was just the hair.
I think age-wise she looks different. And then the actress that they have playing the lady in the corner also has like this big black mark on the side of her face.
I didn't notice that.
Um it's just there's a few things that I'm just like I understand how we could say it's her, and I understand like the whole like you see the hands, she's reaching out to lady in the corner, and all of a sudden she starts to like stand up, and the hands, and you get the focus, and then you see the doctor and Ruby in the distance. I can see how we come to the conclusion it is her. I don't know if it fits for me, and I feel it. And this sounds totally bogus. I understand me saying it right now out loud. I myself think, Adam, you're being dense and just accept it that it's her. But because it's not like such a clear explanation for me, and because I feel like there's so many elements that are just like that's not explained, this is just another one of those elements that I feel like I have to pull myself out of and just enjoy the story and the weird loop at the end and just be cool with it. Um,
I think it's clear that it's her because at the end, she, in a way, kind of merges. It's almost like she gets to the point where now she's reached the end of her life. And so she's kind of merging with this woman, kind of, and then she becomes like in that moment. Now, how this woman, like, is she a time traveler? Like, why does she hop back to that point? Kind of this loop. That I think is just explained away with the magic, and it's a curse, and so it's something like
yeah.
almost like she's caught in this time loop as part of the curse. But I think the reason why I'm convinced, and I think 99% of the people probably would agree with me on this one. But hey, if you're listening and you don't, like, we'll love put it on the Facebook page. We have people that love to explain stuff to us. So, yeah, go ahead and let me know if I'm wrong. But I think most people would agree with me here that when you see her kind of hands and
Yeah.
then she
Yep.
and you're seeing it from her perception, and then she
Yeah.
is there on that cliffside, and she's the one that sees and oh, look how young I am,
Yeah.
right? Am I getting the line
Yeah.
wrong?
No, no,
Okay.
you're right.
So I
You're
mean,
right.
she's looking at herself. I think the writers are telling us that. I don't think that part is left up to interpretation. Um, so Adam, I think you're overthinking it. But there are plenty of other things I think we could question. So let's talk a little bit about kind of where the story goes from here, because we do get the Kate Leftwich Stewart cameo. I love that she kind of just pops in. Are you gonna
Yeah.
say something?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
look like
Yeah.
you're about to say
I,
something.
I
Go.
was gonna say like before that though, we get Ruby interacting with her mom and her grandma, and
Oh yes,
like
yeah,
I did find it interesting that basically it sounds like similar to Jackie
Tyler,
Taylor, Jackie Tyler.
Rose
Yeah, you're
Tyler,
right.
yeah,
Rose Tyler. Yeah, there we go. Similar to Jackie, it seems like Ruby's keeping Carla, her mom, fully up to speed on everything. Because when Ruby's like, the doctor never came back, she's like, oh, he's just puttering in his box. That's what men do. They just
Yeah,
like
yeah.
go off in their box and they just mess around. Um, but we ultimately see Carla, who I was convinced like she was not going to run away from Ruby. She ultimately runs away from Ruby.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, that's part of the thing I don't think is explained, and I don't know what's happening, like why everybody was running away from her. Like that.
Yeah,
Once again, the only thing I can chalk it up to is it's part of the curse. Like part of her curse is that other people can't help her. And so when they go and try to confront the woman, then they're kind of scared off and kind of have this negativity toward Ruby because she needs to stay in this time loop and until she can pay amend or pay amends to what she did, I guess. So that's the only explanation I have for why they all turned on him. Because if they just if her mom went over there and just saw that it was an older version of Ruby,
right.
she
Yeah,
wouldn't have that reaction. She would still try to help
no,
her. She'd try to figure it out. She wouldn't like suddenly have this scorn on her face and like, oh, I'm not gonna help you and you can't now you're kicked out of the house and all that. So it was almost like they came under a spell. And I think that's all part of the magic. We're learning now with Doctor Who that this season is going to be very focused on like kind of supernatural. And so this
yeah,
episode has essentially a curse and magic that's happening. So some of the unexplained can just be easily explained if you say, oh, well, it's just part of the curse. It's part of the magic.
yeah, yeah, yeah. That's everybody abandons Ruby her whole
Yes.
life. Because after Carla, then we get Kate, right? Like Ruby goes through quite a bit to try to get in contact with her mom and her grandma again, and her mom's like, hey, just leave me alone. Then we find out that Ruby gets a job. She does her own little thing for a little bit, gets her own apartment. Then she comes in contact with Kate. And to your point, it was cool to see Kate show up in this. Again, I thought, hey, this is where everything's going to turn around.
Yeah. Kate was so confident
Yeah,
in how
yep,
that she was going to deal with this. I was like, Kate, I was confident in Kate. I was like, all right, she's
yep.
telling me on this. She showed up. She's like, yeah, don't worry about it. We got psychic dampeners and whatever you feel and this
Yep,
and that. And like, we're not going to be bothered by this person. We're just going to go arrest her. Like, okay, cool. Like, let's see what happens. And then same thing. They all go in to arrest her. They all kind of stop. And who knows why? I don't know what she's saying to them. They never really tell us. And
right,
then we see Kate kind of with her earpiece, and she's hearing either what the soldiers are telling her or what
right,
she can hear what the woman's saying. I don't know. But then she gets that same kind of look of disgust on her face at Ruby. And so at this, like, okay, so at this point, you haven't put it two and two together, right? As to what's going on. So what were you thinking at this point? Like, what do you think these people were hearing that was making them so upset?
oh,
Or like, did you have any theories, or were you just kind of like, man, what's going on?
no, I didn't have any theories. And I still don't have any theories, right? Like I think where my mind immediately goes is Ruby is a mystery. Uh, we have a lot of questions about who she is, where she came from, what her end story is going to be. So the only thought that I had was there's some secret being told about Ruby in this moment that we haven't been made privy to yet. But it's something ridiculously devastating for
Right.
Ruby in the future. And that is what's causing everything to happen. Now, going back to your explanation, maybe it's absolutely nothing. Maybe it's magic. Maybe it's part of the curse. Maybe it isn't anything that will ever be looped in on, or even matters for the future of the story. But in the moment, it was like, oh, this is just another signpost pointing towards the end story of who Ruby Sunday
That would have been probably more satisfying
is.
but I think because we know that it was Ruby,
Yeah.
that it was Ruby Adam. We know that it was Ruby. That
Yeah, yeah, we know
why would
100%. 100%. I'm on board. It was Ruby.
okay, assuming it's Ruby, then what would Ruby say about herself, that would make people so upset. So I think we know that it's not that. It's not something that's revealed about her or some future thing that she's going to do. Or, if it had been just some random person, they could say, oh, this person that you're trying to help is actually the person who's going to, bring the end of the world or bring the gods
Yeah.
upon us, or, something like that, where they're like, where they would have this kind of attitude against her. But I think more likely it is just part of the curse is kind of, at least that's what I'm telling myself.
I yeah, I think either way. I think either way it works. I'm now curious because this is where in this scene, this is where they go through a great deal of effort to confirm that whoever this is never gets closer than or further away than 73 yards, right? Like this is where we finally get the reason for why the episode is named what it's named.
Right.
Um, is there any significance to 73 yards? Is that as close as you can get to yourself when time traveling without causing a paradox to take place? Is 73 yards that magic number?
I don't think so. I think it's just a clever. So apparently, what I heard was Davies, I guess, did some research on it, and apparently that's the furthest if you have 20/20 vision, that's the furthest someone can be, or someone can be that close to you without being able to recognize what they look like.
That's
Um,
flipping brilliant.
yeah, and I mean, it sounds exactly like something that would be in Doctor Who, right? Like that.
Yeah.
So that's the explanation that the official explanation sounds right to me. So I like it.
Yeah.
I think it's a kind of a cool concept. I love it when it does seem like Doctor Who sometimes will kind of come across like a fun fact or like something like that, and it's like, oh, let's make a whole show about it. The creaking of the floors, like whatever. We've had these multiple episodes where it's literally just based on one thing,
Yeah. Yep.
the boogie monster. Like these are things where like we take a small little thing and then we make a whole episode around it. And so I could see that being a fact that he came across one day, probably when he was like, researching something. It was like, oh wait, 73 yards is the distance away that you can not recognize something. Oh, I can make
Yeah.
a whole episode around that. And he did. So I thought that was pretty clever. So yeah, that's the explanation behind 73 yards.
Yeah. Well, I love that explanation. And that's what happens in the scene. And that's kind of what is explained that they can't ever get a clear look at the clear view of the woman's face. And she consistently stays 73 yards away. After Kate, it seems like Ruby just kind of comes to accept that
She's just
this is
living with it.
life.
Yeah, she's just living with it. And she
Yeah.
sees this lady everywhere. Yeah, this is the part where, like I said, like it's sad, but you also start to realize, okay, this is going to be reversed. This is not the way that Ruby's going to live her life.
Right.
So it's kind of, oh, I guess we should at least mention that when she talked to Kate, Kate mentions um something about timeline. Like
Yeah.
this, I think this timeline might be suspended along your event or whatever. She gives some kind of line like that where it's like, okay, the idea of there being multiple timelines. Now, it's not the first time Doctor Who has talked about multiple universes or dimensions. What we do know about the Doctor is he doesn't tend to travel between. Like he'll happen upon, or like, there will be things that happen that cause him to go into another, reality. But it's not like the Doctor can just jump from one timeline to the next. He can go through space and time, it seems like within along one timeline, but it's not
Hmm.
something he has the power to jump from different timelines. But the mention of, kind of Kate implying like your timeline, implying there are multiple timelines, I think opens the door for potential other storytelling that they may be planning, where they can, the idea of this Doctor Who multiverse, where they could start to say, okay, actually, this is the timeline that, the 15th Doctor in those stories are on, but then we're going to have a separate timeline where this Doctor can have their own stories. I'm not saying that's where they're going with it, but this line drop felt intentional, that maybe there are things that we will start to be having to accept, that there isn't just one timeline that stories are going to fall in.
No, and I think that's interesting because I think like the question, where did the doctor go? So if at the point that they break the fairy circle and the timeline splits and they're now in a suspended timeline separate from the main timeline and the doctor doesn't cross over timelines, he would be absent from the suspended timeline. Like maybe only Ruby got broken out and the doctor didn't. Does that am
Yeah.
I just
I
like
mean,
and that's why the doctor's absent because he's still in the main timeline.
yeah.
Maybe he's on the timeline being like, where'd Ruby go?
But
Um
yeah, but the only thing like at the end when they are back together again and she's able to affect them not stepping on it,
yeah.
it seems like that and they move forward. So did she jump to the other timeline or like when that happened
So
or is it
so
just a
that
continual loop within the same timeline?
that's because of magic.
Yeah, and that yeah, there you go. That's we could
Don't explain this.
which I mean, to be fair, we're way overthinking it because Doctor Who breaks its own rules all the time. So if
Right.
it's a different timeline, magic, whatever they want, it's whatever they want. Like they don't follow any kind of set of rules. I think there is a kind of a baseline of rules they try to follow, but they definitely break the rules all the time. So, you know, who knows where the Doctor went, and we may never know for sure where he went, but he didn't seem to have any memory of anything going wrong, and there
Yep.
was no explanation as to where he was. So it's kind of as viewers, I think we're just meant to accept whatever was broken, Ruby fixed, and everything's fine now. That was kind of the
Yeah.
conclusion. And if
Yep.
you want to overthink it, you want to theorize, you can do that. But like for the story purposes, they fixed it, you know,
Right. Yep.
and the doctor doesn't really have any memory of it.
Yeah. So I mean, from Kate again, we mentioned that Ruby just kind of like accepts what's taking place. We get we get the periodic Ruby getting older check-ins. What are the age like
Montage.
30, 40,
Yeah, they went with
just
the
kind
even
of
numbers. Yeah.
right, just moving forward, going on dates, getting jobs. Nothing works out. She always seems distracted. Is there
Yeah.
somebody else? Yeah, there is. There's an old woman that always stands 73 yards away from her. And it seemed like Ruby is toasting this individual out in the street at any and every chance that she gets. She raises a glass to her and wonders, why are you still here? It isn't until the campaign for prime minister shows up on the TV that things start to get interesting again.
Right. She sees the prime minister on the TV that the doctor has already name dropped. And like,
Yes.
oh, this is the guy that the doctor said is bad, that he's gonna
Yep.
basically almost, cause a nuclear war, which I was thinking about it and I'm like, wait, how would the doctor even know that if he wasn't part of that story or that timeline? Like he never lived that.
Yeah.
He was gone when all that
Right.
happened and she stopped it
Yeah.
from happening. So how would he even be aware of it? That was another thing that kind of stood out to me is like, oh, maybe another version of the doctor traveled to the same time and saw this guy that was doing this. I don't know, but I found that interesting that it kind of, timey-wimey doesn't necessarily make sense that he had that information. But once again, Tennant also knew things he was going to say that he hadn't said yet in Blink, right? So
Yeah.
he,
Yeah.
so
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's timey-wimey. That's the answer to that, I think. But that did stick out to me. Like, wait, how would he know about this guy? He didn't even live through that.
Yeah. 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 That
But
it's
this guy is very, Roger Ap Gwilliam is very young, upcoming politician. He's, charismatic. He's going on
yep.
these shows, but he's got kind of a controversial take on nuclear weapons. It's all fitting in place as to what we know. The doctor said, "Hey, this guy's trouble."
Right.
But as you're watching him, like this guy seems pretty like he seems like a pretty good guy. Like I might vote for him. If you didn't already know what he was going to do. He's just thinking of the security of his country. He just wants to have a place of power in the world. There's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, he's very, wins people over, very
right.
charismatic. I kind of hope we see this guy again. I don't know if this is just like a one-off, hey, we threw this guy in for this purpose, but I thought he was a very good actor and I kind of liked, kind of the dynamic that he brought. And I was like, oh, that'd be kind of a cool character as a foil for the Doctor, maybe in another way or something. But I don't know. I thought maybe a bit of a wasted character because I really enjoyed the parts that he was in.
I mean, for the time that he's on the screen, he plays it very well, right? Like because the politics are one thing, but they also frame him very much as being that uh the type of politician who uses. I mean, sexual harassment is like right there, right? Like he uses Ruby to get to know another individual, which this is a very, I feel like this is a very controversial aspect of the show because Ruby knows exactly what's
What's
going
going
on,
on? And she
but
doesn't, it doesn't do anything about it.
right, she doesn't do anything about it. It just kind of progresses, it moves forward. But yeah, the way that they kind of frame this individual as he he's not a good character.
Yeah. And
And
I think that
Ruby is like,
it did feel like that was intentional, almost
oh
like
yeah,
I don't know, that part felt a little off to me. Like almost like they didn't need that. We're already seeing them as this dangerous guy who is going to bring the world to the brink of annihilation. But then also, I guess just to hit home the point, like just in case you were wondering if this is a
right,
good guy or not, let's also say let's imply because they were really, I mean, they really skirted around it.
right,
As far as like you could imply what was going on, but there was never any kind of right in your face kind of moment where you're like, oh wow, like he's not treating this girl very well. She says he's a
right.
monster, and you can kind of see
Yep.
her emotional distress, but you don't really know kind of what's leading to that. You can just kind of infer. But yeah, I kind of thought, oh, they could have probably not had any of that, and you still would have had the same outcome, the same story, probably the same, kind of this guy's not a good guy. That felt like maybe a little extra.
Yeah, I I agree. And I think what pushes me even further that direction is right because the time goes by and there's the opportunity. He ends up winning. He's going to be the prime minister. He's going to get the nuclear codes. Ruby's like, "Hey, all of this is going to happen." They have this huge event in a soccer stadium. She's out on the pitch or not on the pitch yet. They're in the stands. And the one part that like the reason why I'm totally on board with you, where it's like they didn't need to have this other aspect to his character, is because it really does like raise this huge question mark for Ruby because Ruby it seems like Ruby has a clearer picture of what he was doing than what we as the audience member or as an audience member get because right before she walks out onto the soccer pitch, right before she does what she feels like she's supposed to have been doing from the very beginning, she looks at the girl and basically says, I'm sorry, I should have done something sooner. Like, I should have protected you, but I didn't. But now I'm going to do something. Like that, like, I don't know.
Like,
To paint Ruby as someone who knew something bad was going on, someone was being hurt,
mm,
impacted, it just seems like you didn't do the character of Ruby any favors by painting her in that light. I don't know. It's something that I found very strange about this episode that like she apologizes saying she knew what was going on, but she's
mm,
only acting on it now.
yeah. I think, and she kind of gives a little bit of an explanation as to like it was almost like she needed to wait till a certain moment to be able to accomplish what she was trying to do. And in
Right.
order to get to that moment, she needed to allow it to play out, which meant she couldn't help this girl for the greater good, maybe. And like, I'm not saying
Right.
that's a good excuse, but like, and you obviously she was torn. She obviously wanted to help this person, but maybe felt like, hey, if I intervene in this way, it's going to throw off the plan for me to ultimately stop this guy. Um, but yeah, I feel like maybe that's something that maybe they put it in there just to make it more kind of have a little bit more edge, where you're like looking at the story, like it's not so clean cut.
Yeah.
But I think they could have probably taken that out and it might have been more palatable in the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how certain were you that Ruby was going to get shot on the soccer pitch?
I knew she wasn't.
No.
Because I knew she had to get
Yes.
to 73. They're doing the countdown. She's using her phone to measure the distance.
Right.
They're counting it down and how many, I'm like, okay, she's not. I mean, it did feel like there was this tension, the guns pointed at her, one more step, but you already saw when they said one more step and she was already at 72. I'm like, okay, she's gonna hit 73. You just kind of knew it was gonna happen. So I wasn't
That's
in
I was
fear
convinced
for her
I was
life.
convinced she was going to take a bullet and then she was like going to crawl the extra like 2
Uh,
yards to get the character where it needed to
I
be.
guess she could have done it that
Um
way because then maybe she dies at that moment and then that's when she kind of like merges. But I think having the parts with the older woman and all that, I
yeah.
think it did add to the story at the end, I thought so.
Right, because basically what we get set up is she's on the soccer pitch, she backs up, and the minute that she walks out there, you realize because the entire time she's seen her tag along, the one who follows, standing in the stands, and you know she's gonna line her up perfectly with William, um, and sure enough, she does. And he runs off, and it's like, oh, she did what she was supposed to do. Everything's done and dusted. Show's resolved. It's not. Ruby
No,
continues to grow old. The lady still follows her everywhere she goes, always standing 73 yards. Um, yeah, and it I found that incredibly satisfying, to be honest.
that it
Like the
wasn't a
fact that she
simple
did what
solution.
the fact that she did what she was convinced she needed to do, and it was like, this is why you've been following me along or following me around, and she accomplished it, but it didn't solve anything for her. She still had to live out the rest of her life with this thing following her around.
Yeah. Oh, that's the other old thing. You just made me think about like if I'm gonna list off the things I don't like about the old stories. When was it Amy and Rory when they got touched by the angels and then they had to age up
Yep.
and they see him in the bed and he's all old and like, yeah, that's the other thing. Like they always, it's such a trope. They do it all the time in Doctor Who. So the hope this is the
Aging's
last one.
scary.
Yeah,
It's
maybe.
the worst thing that can
Maybe
happen.
that's why I don't like it. It's like an internal fear of, becoming old and being, whatever. So, um, but yeah, you just for whatever reason, what you were just saying, conjured that in my head. I was imagining old Rory in my head. I'm like, oh man.
Yep.
Um, I mean,
Yep.
I will give them this because a lot of times I've complained about them doing like old people makeup on a lot of these characters, and it looks
Yeah.
horrible. Like especially when they did Matt Smith.
Oh
They,
yeah.
they didn't do that with her. They cast an actual old woman to play her older. They did do some makeup to age her up to 40, but it was
Right.
all believable. She looked, I thought they did a great job on that part of it. But yeah, I'm glad that they didn't just put really old people makeup on Millie Gibson to make her look like a 70-year-old or 80-year-old. That's what they should always do. Just cast an older
Yeah.
person.
Yep. Agreed. 100%. Because it played off much better as she's laying in her bed. And kind of a grumpy old lady, right? The nurse is explaining to her how to operate the light, and she's like, I had this when I was young.
Loved it. I thought the writing of
Yeah.
that part was perfect because that is exactly how people at that point in their life that's how
Yep.
they talk. They don't care anymore. They're like, okay, you don't
Yep.
need to explain things. I thought that she played it really well.
Yeah. It's and this is where we get to the most controversial aspect of the entire episode that so many people have questions about. Because the old lady shows up in the corner of the room, and we start the loop over. Aaron,
He died.
who's the old lady? She died? No. It
Well, I'm
is
saying
it
she
is old
died. Yeah,
Ruby.
yeah.
Yeah.
Ruby dies, and then the loop starts, and she gets into a position where she can warn herself to not step on the thing. I think that is my interpretation of what's happening here. They don't clearly state that, but my interpretation is it's all part of the curse. She needs to break the curse and she had to pay that penance. And I will say, Davis, if you look at the behind the scenes stuff, he does have a line where he talks about Ruby having to pay a penance for what she did. And so I think that kind of adds to that backs it up a little bit more too, that's really what was going on, is that there was a curse. She had to kind of pay the price, which meant she had to kind of live a whole life of, I mean, kind of two lives, right? Like she spent an entire lifetime not knowing who this person was, but also living the life of that person trying to warn her through
Yeah.
that entire life. So she had to go through that. And then the assumption is that she was able to warn herself before it happened again. but we don't know if it happened more, if how many times she had to go through it. My assumption is she just had to go through it the one time, um, but yeah, so she does warn herself. Not really like it's still kind of the weird like doing the hand motions and doesn't really shout out. You do kind of hear this like, watch your step. Is that what she says?
Don't step.
Don't step.
Don't step.
Don't
Don't
step.
step.
You kind of hear it, but it's like
Yeah.
you don't really hear it. And the doctor obviously doesn't hear it. The doctor doesn't even perceive her.
Right.
But I think once that curse is broken, then now that's why she disappeared. Because she was only there until the doctor was stopped from stepping on it, and then she was gone. And so even Ruby couldn't see her anymore. So I think that was an indication at that point that the curse had been broken and that they could go on with their normal life. So
Yeah.
in the end, I will say, upon one viewing, I was kind of frustrated because I was like, I feel like none of this makes sense. Then after like researching it and watching an explainer video and listening to interviews, watching it a second time, then I'm like, okay, now I can wrap my head around an explanation that makes sense to me. But I also think I shouldn't have to do all that to come to that conclusion. So
So
bad
was
writing, I don't know. Maybe that was the intention. They wanted to leave it kind of ambiguous.
I I think it's probably because we're like for the first time, for the first time in New Who, we're dealing with magic,
Magic.
supernatural, something that's not science, timey-wimey explainable, right? Like typically we would get a doctor to explain either just tell us, hey, it's timey-wimey, or he would explain how a time loop works and like why we are stuck here and how we got back to the beginning. But if this is truly magic, it feels like it's a fairly new concept in Doctor Who and maybe can
And
be
it,
confusing.
well, we did have the one where you just had to think about love and it
Just
fixed
think about
everything.
love.
So that
Right,
was,
but that's science. Love is science.
but yeah, we have had other moments where it's kind of like they kind of easily got out of something without a good explanation. But yeah, I agree with you. For the most part, there is some. And the other thing about this one too is it's not even going to be like the doctor is going to ask her about it or like, oh, how did you? Because he doesn't
Right.
know, and she doesn't seem to really have a memory of it either, or I guess wouldn't because she's just now coming upon it, so it never happened. It's almost like
Yeah.
because she broke the loop that like all that stuff that she lived through actually never happened, and that's even that Goyim guy like didn't really happen. So I guess that's the other question. Was he just a bad guy, or when they broke the circle, did they release Mad Jack into the world, which he then this was another theory that I heard people talking about, which also once again, if that was what was going on, I wish they would have explained that a little better in the show. But like almost like he inhibited this guy, and that's why they released this kind of evil spirit almost that went and inhibited this guy who wanted to destroy the world. Um, I don't know. Did you think
I
anything
I don't
about
know
that?
because I guess what I was just trying to figure out is if he is ever like if the start of the episode where we have the prime minister mentioned and then the fairy circle it mentions Mad Jack. And then later in the episode it is just like he says people I was a jack of all trades. Mad Jack, that's what they called me. And that's when it's like, oh, Mad Jack, fairy circle. But are those necessarily connected? So like
Well, it's a
is
very intentional line drop. Like
right, but that doesn't mean that Mad Jack was part of the fairy circle, right? Like
rest in peace, Mad Jack.
rest in peace, Mad Jack. Like he was in the future. Why would he be resting in peace
Well,
in the
that's the
past?
point, I think, is that the rest in peace Mad Jack was like this evil entity, or maybe some bad person in the past that now has died, and they built this circle maybe to entrap his spirit, and they released him, and then that's why he was able to go and
So
I don't know,
so
like
what if because her stopping the prime minister does absolutely nothing for her situation, right? What if the prime minister that was that was a side quest? It doesn't even matter. She could have or she didn't have to do anything with the prime minister. she was just looking for meaning, and so that's what she thought she was supposed to be doing. But in the end,
You
all
don't
she had to do
think?
was prevent herself from stepping on the fairy circle in the first
But in
place.
order to get to the point to warn herself, maybe she had to. Maybe the side quest was the trigger. Maybe that's what allowed her to, like, when she died, to be able to be at a point where she could warn herself. If she didn't do the thing that she did to save the world, maybe she would have constantly just been in this loop.
Just circled back and forth.
I don't
That's
know. Like I said,
I don't
this
know.
is
It
all
doesn't
things
seem
we
like it
have
has
to
any impact.
speculate, and
Yeah,
they didn't tell us. And so
yeah,
that's why we're left speculating, because there were so many of these like threads that they didn't really explain that kind of makes sense if if you kind of jump to some
yeah,
conclusions,
yeah.
but you can make it make sense. But
Oh yeah.
in the end, they didn't tell us all the details.
So I'm gonna take the fatalistic, pessimistic, stoic approach and just say nothing mattered. All she had to do was get to the end of her life and die, and she would have been able to warn herself that she was searching for meaning. And that's why she found meaning where she wanted to find meaning, but ultimately it didn't matter. That's my take on
That's
the
true.
episode.
So when did
This
you
is
become
pointless
me?
side
Like,
quest.
what have we swapped places here? Like, what? Usually I'm the one that's cynical about this stuff. No, I think because they did have the Mad Jack mention
Yeah,
in the circle, and he said that his nickname. I think there was a connection there that she had to accomplish that task in order for it to allow her to break the circle. That's my take on it.
I
Um,
think your take is probably the accurate take. I just think that the fact that it's open for
and it has to
interpretation.
be, right? You don't tell a story that doesn't matter. It has to matter. So that's the conclusion we have to jump to.
Occasionally, again, like I
In Doctor
appreciate
Who, usually Doctor
in
like
Doctor
other
Who.
storytellers, yeah, sure. There's plenty of stories out there
Yeah,
that you watch and you're like, oh my gosh, like the bad guy wins in the end, or like everything they did meant
right.
nothing. Rogue One, they all die at the end. Like, like there's storytellers that love to do that kind of stuff. But I feel like in Doctor Who, there tends to be resolution and
Right.
some sort of a happy ending
Yeah.
at the end of most episodes. So
Understood. I so slipping slightly into the next episode because you mentioned, hey, does Ruby even remember any of this? Right. We get into the next episode and Susan Twists shows up again. And both the doctor and Ruby say, don't we know her from somewhere? And the doctor's like, yeah, she was the face of all the ambulances. And Ruby's like, there was somewhere else. Do you think that's a reference to one of the other appearances, or do you think she remembers the hiker?
I think she remembers the coffee lady.
Okay, you think it's the coffee lady? You don't think she has some faint memory of what happened in the fairy circle?
I mean, maybe it's possible.
Maybe.
I think there will be. It doesn't. It makes sense to me that she would have some vague kind of memories of maybe some things that happened in that event. Maybe it comes back. There could be connections. I feel like they have probably dropped some connections that we're just not even picking up on yet. I'm like looking
Yeah.
for details now. They showed the sign of the pub, and it was like
Yeah.
established in
Oh yeah.
1863, and I'm like 1863. That's like, you know, 63 is the year that, so I'm starting to like
Yeah.
look at stuff that probably doesn't matter. So it'll be interesting to see if they are dropping little hints on us that we're just not catching.
So so how much do you love this season of Doctor Who and all the little tidbits that do have meaning that get us to look for meaning in things that probably don't have meaning? Are you enjoying the continued mysteries and tie-ins and touch points so far? What is this? Episode
Yeah.
5? No, episode 4.
I mean, I think that's what makes Doctor Who great. So yeah, if it didn't have that stuff, I probably wouldn't like it as much. I think that those type of things that they drop in, that's what keeps me coming back for more. Because that way you can have an episode that's a miss, like Space Babies, which was a miss for me, and I forgive you because you had a scene where it's snowing in a hallway, and like we now know
Yeah.
that Ruby has some kind of connection, and there, I used to make it snow when I was younger. She even says that in her deathbed. So that obviously means something. So, I think those are the hooks that, kind of keep you interested. So yeah, I love it. I would say so far this season, I mean, I know they've already had a lot of episodes and it's crazy how fast it's going.
Yeah.
But I mean, other than the babies episode, like I've really liked everything. Even the next episode I thought was interesting in its own way. So yeah, I think it's been good.
Yeah. Nope. Agreed.
I hope the resolution is satisfying. That's what we always what do we say about Jodie Whittaker's
Right.
all the stuff they were dropping on us with that. We're like, well, I hope they stick the landing.
Yep.
Uh,
Yep.
I feel the same way about this. I think that sometimes the mystery that leads up to the ending is sometimes better than the ending. Sometimes you get a not so satisfying ending, but yeah, I'm
I
enjoying it.
mean, the ending is going to be interesting, right? Because it was announced a week or two ago that they are going to be showing the last two episodes in theaters.
In England, though.
So yeah, in England. So there's the potential that there's going to be a lot of spoilers out there for those of us who don't have the opportunity to watch them in that format. Because we have the 15th of June is the last episode, or is the part one of the last episode, and then the 22nd of June is part two. So we will have a week span of time
So by the end of this
between
month,
those. Yeah, we're done.
but
But,
we also know there's a Christmas special.
yep,
So who's to say that they don't save some of that for that?
true.
Just because the season will technically be ending at the end of June, there could still be some unresolved things that they save for the Christmas special or things beyond.
Yep.
We were speculating about the character Mundy Flynn.
Yeah,
Wow,
yeah,
how did
yeah,
I
yeah.
remember that name? Well, I'm impressed that I remember that.
Pulled it out.
Yeah, the we were like saying if it's going to be the same. Did we already talk about this?
Yeah, no, we haven't, but we
Okay.
do need to recognize. I will be the one that states it because if you sing your own praise, it just comes out weird. I will admit, right? We were having a big discussion as to whether Mundy Flynn was going to be the returning, right? That's the future companion. The actress that plays Mundy Flynn will be the future companion. The question was whether she will be returning as Mundy Flynn or if she would be coming as a totally new character.
Mhm.
I said it's going to make more sense for her to show up as Mundy Flynn, right? Like it checks out, it's logical, all this other stuff. You went out on a limb and said, hey, it might be similar to other companions we had in the past. She shows up as a totally new companion. You were right, Aaron. That's RTD came out not too long ago and mentioned, hey, she actually Mundy Flynn's story is done. There's not going to be return of Mundy Flynn. The actress is coming back, totally new character, uh, as a new companion.
There
And
you go.
yeah.
I wasn't going to even like gloat or like that I was right. I was just going to mention the fact that that news had come out, but I appreciate you giving me credit for speculating correctly. I didn't necessarily say I thought for sure that's what was going to happen, but I think I was just like I think that's my guess or more likely.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah, yeah.
two more things, and then if you had anything else you want to mention, the the TARDIS being up on the top of that hill and getting all mossy and old and stuff.
Yeah,
I I did remember that scene where David Tennant was going through his little monologue about what would happen to the TARDIS if it was left alone and like become this. I thought that was awesome that they kind of
yeah,
brought that to fruition for people that kind of remembered back on that monologue because that I loved that speech he gave and then to see it visualized was really cool. So
yeah,
that I wanted to point that out. Did you have
yeah.
anything else in the
No,
episode that before we wrap up?
no. I mean, there's I don't know. There's always right. There's all the speculation out there. I'm not going to touch on.
There's always
Uh,
a twist at the end.
there's always a twist at the end, right?
There
And
was
people
in
are
this one.
slowly picking apart that character. Uh, and pointing out interesting things about even the apparel that she wears and why what she wears and the color of clothes that she wears indicates whether we're talking about the past or the future. Um, but
Oh wow. See, that's like
there's
that gets too deep. I feel like when people start to go down those roads, I'm like, no, they're 99% of the time there's nothing to it. Like these ridiculous speculations that go on about stuff.
it's
So
wild how true it holds. Where it's
yeah.
like if
Well,
it's if Susan Twist shows up in the past, she's
okay.
wearing reddish brown, or red. If she shows up in the future, she's blue. The hiker, as she walks towards uh, Ruby, is wearing blue. But as she walks away from Ruby, her backpack is red. so so there's front, back, past is red, blue is future. It's I don't know. We'll see how she shows up in the next episode, right? Uh,
Yeah, we'll see.
but
Well, the last thing, if we don't have anything else on this episode specifically, I was gonna just point out the passing of William Russell,
yeah,
who played
that's
one of our
wild.
favorite companions. Because
Yes.
we haven't done a lot of like classic Doctor reviews, but we did kind of early days. We did dabble. We when we were reviewing, we had like kind of the off season, and we're like, oh, let's jump back and review. So we did do quite a bit of episodes reviewing the first Doctor's adventures. So that's why we know about Susan and Ian.
Yep.
Yeah, so like yeah, to see that, he passed was sad because that is actually one of the classic companions that we did watch a lot of his stuff and actually really liked the character, I think, for the most part.
Yeah.
We enjoyed.
Ian Chesterton was tops. It was wild to see that news come through today. Um, yeah, it's a passing of a legend. It's a passing of history. Um, but
The
yeah, that did
original
that did happen today.
the original companion or one of back when they had a three person kind of companion situation
Yep.
in the first Doctor. So yeah, I saw that pop up today, so I thought it was at least worth mentioning.
Yeah, absolutely. Um,
But yeah, so I guess we will. I know we're kind of running a little bit behind as far as, I was traveling out of the country and we weren't able to keep up with the episodes as they came out, so we'll try to get caught back up.
yeah, I stepped on a fairy circle and we kind of our timeline split off. You disappeared for a solid week
Disappeared.
and a half.
I disappeared and so did you have to like live through
Oh,
all to
yeah, and
that
I'm
sounds
still not
horrible.
convinced I'm the same person that I was at the end of the episode as what I am at the beginning.
We should do a poll. We should do a
I'm gonna
poll.
I'm gonna
Like
post a poll.
how many people
Give me
believe
all your wild theories about is Aaron right that it's the same person, or is Adam right that it's a totally different person? And give me your theories for that prove Adam's right.
hey,
Um,
there's some commentary on it, like she said, I'm always abandoned, everyone that, everyone abandons me, but I wasn't
yeah,
alone for 65 years, implying that this, woman was with her for these 65 years. Um, but it ends up it was her the whole time. So I don't know if that's
right.
some kind of commentary on like the only person that's really there for you is you.
Is yourself.
Yeah, that's kind of a sad lesson to be learned. I don't know if like that's kind
Yeah.
of what that was kind of saying there, I thought was maybe hopefully Ruby has some better times as the adventures go on, or she can find her true family or make sure she stays connected to her found family and doesn't feel like she's always being abandoned. Because at some point the
Yeah.
doctor will have to leave her behind, or maybe he will pass and she'll be with a new doctor. I don't know. But yeah, let's hope she
Yep.
doesn't get abandoned again.
Yeah. We'll see, right? There's gonna be another companion. She'll have someone else to
She'll have a
travel with her.
friend.
But
All
yeah.
right.
I mean,
Well,
I need to finish by saying, based on the transcript, it is old Ruby. I'm willing to admit it is her. I don't know if I agree with it, but I will admit it is her
does
at
it
the
say
end.
that in
So
like in the subtitles or something? Like,
yeah. It
okay.
calls her old Ruby.
Oh,
So
there you go. Yeah.
well,
Clearly,
clearly, clearly I
clear
was
as
wrong.
day. Clear as day.
Clear as day. Cool.
Well, on that note, wrong twice, Adam. I don't know. Are you gonna be able to stand this? We got to record again tomorrow night. So, all right. Well, we will for now be done with this episode, and we'll come back and review the very interesting episode that's coming up next about the, I forget the name of it, but something about a bubble. Dot,
Dot and Bubble.
dot and bubble. Lots of social commentary on that one. So that one will be a fun discussion. But until next time,
Well, she's not there anymore. End of the episode. That's the doctor. She's not there anymore. That's all that matters. Um,
Dr. Light
so
indeed. Dr. Light.
yeah, it was Dr. Light. So what are the chances that Susan is actually Susan?